What's going on, everybody? It's Joe from God's Eye Games here to do another Learning the Rules video. This is going to be for a Gunslinger's Paradise, the poker chips. So for those of you who picked up the rule set, the poker chip mechanic is kind of the driving force behind how we do initiative, how we initiate rerolls, how we give some of our characters extra actions to play. The chip stack is baked into your list building, and then once you start playing the game, it's also fueled by an additional D10 chips that you will generate each turn throughout the length of the game. So kind of just to go over like this briefly, we're going to go over it more in depth when we get into list building. We're just kind of just glaze over the top of it right here, so we can kind of get rolling into how the chips form from your list and then how they get used on the tabletop. So based on whatever list you choose, each character class that you're going to put in your list is going to have a chip stat. It's a CHP inside your character block. These are the amount of chips that this character generates for your list when you're creating your list. Usually your tier 1 characters, you're going to have one or two options. You might have a little bit more depending on playing like townsfolk or some other things like that, where you're going to get usually 2 to 3 chips, sometimes more, depending on if you buy upgrades or not, that are getting added to your stack. So when you're building your list, we'll just say we have the chief right here. We'll just say for argument's sake, he gives you 3 chips and when you put him in your list. Then you have a medicine man, we'll say on horseback above there. He's going to give you an additional 2 chips on your list. And then down here you have a regular Sioux warrior who just generates 1 chip. So just with these 3 guys right here, you're going to have 6 poker chips to start every turn with, to bid for activations, to throw in the pot if you want to get a reroll, or maybe you burn 2 of those chips to get an extra action for when you have one of these guys activated. On the flip side of that, we're going to look over here on the right side of your screen. That's going to be, we'll say, the bandits list. So the bandit leader, maybe he only generates 2 poker chips. He's your tier 1 character, he's your boss. Lower quality troop, but still a pretty decent adversary, so you're going to get 2 chips based off his stat block. And then the 2 other men that he brought with them, we'll just say they generate 1 chip each for their respective classes. So you both have 3 guys on the table, but since you have lower quality troops with the bandits, or maybe that's just their stat blocks are geared maybe more toward offensive stats, or maybe vitality or some of the other parts of the stat block, they may be getting less in the chips department. So like I said, that varies from faction to faction, class to class. So how you build your list is definitely going to affect how big or small your initial chip stack is going to be once you start the game. Now, once you start the game, these aren't the only chips that you're going to have to play. Each turn, at the beginning of each turn, before any activations or bidding starts, you're going to roll a d10 for each side, and you're going to add that number of chips to your stack. So we'll just say like turn 1, I roll a die and I get a 4. So now I have 10 chips in total for my Sioux. And then we'll just say I roll a 7 and now I have 11 chips for my bandit faction. Now, like I said, this is going to ebb and flow in the turn. Some turns, you might have that solid stack of chips based off your list building that you're going to be able to rely on every turn. But that usually results in you usually having a less amount of troops on the table, and that kind of goes in the strategy of list building. But we'll just go back to the chips part of this conversation before I go too far off on a tangent here. But for the chips purposes, like I said, there's going to be an ebb and flow every turn. Some turns you might be loaded up on chips, and you're going to have enough chips to, bid on and activate all your troops, and you might have a couple even left over to throw in for some rerolls and some extra stuff. And then other turns, you might roll horribly on that D10 roll, and you really might have to play much more conservatively as far as purchasing rerolls, or maybe not being as aggressive in the activation part of the turn where you're bidding for activations. You might have to be a little more passive. So we're going to get into that right now so you guys can kind of see how that shakes out. So at the beginning of each turn, we're going to keep these same chip stacks. You're going to roll for your chips. Now, at the beginning of each turn, also you're going to roll against your opponent to see who is going to make the first bid on the first activation of the turn. So we'll just say the Sioux ended up winning that first bid, the roll off to make the first bid. So for argument's sake, we're going to say I want to bid 1 chip for the first activation on activating my my war chief, we'll say. Now, the bandit player is going to have the option to say, you know what, I'm going to just let it ride. I'm going to give him this activation. I don't want to one up him on the chip activations, and boom, you would get to move your guy first. It would cost you one chip, and you'd throw the chip to the side. You wouldn't have that anymore. But what you can do if you were the bandits is you can say, you know what, this is the first part of this is the beginning of the turn. I want to get a leg up against my opponent. I'm going to throw in 2 chips, and I'm going to bid 2 for this activation. That's how much I want it. Well, now the bandit player has the control of the activation. It goes back to the Sioux player. The Sioux player has an option to either A, throw in 2 more chips and make it 3, or he can say, you know what, it's too rich for my blood, it's too early in the turn, we'll see how things shake out. I'm going to take my chip back and give you the activation, the bandit player, and he will be able to activate for the cost of 2 chips. He'll be able to move his guy, shoot, do whatever he wants to do in the process. After he is done activating his character, it goes back to the Sioux player. Whatever player won the previous activation, they relinquish control of the first bid to the other player. So like I said, the bandits won that activation, so the Sioux player will get to make the activation, the next activation bid, opening bid. So we'll say he goes and he drops 1 again. Same thing as last time. The bandit player can say, you know what, take the activation, or he can try to outbid you with 2 chips. We'll just say, for argument's sake, the Sioux player's like, you know what, I can't let you go twice in a row. I need this activation. You bid 3 chips. So the Sioux gets his activation for 3 chips. The bandit player gets his 2 chips back, because when you lose the activation, the bidding for the activation, you get your chips back. If you win the activation, you lose your chips. So this will go back and forth throughout the turn. What ends up happening is once a player is out of chips completely, they can no longer activate any characters on the table. So say you have 10 guys on the table and you burn all of your chips for rerolls and you go super heavy in the beginning for trying to outbid your opponent for activations, and then you get to the middle of the turn and you realize, I only got 1 poker chip left and I got 5 guys left on the table. Well, guess what? That's your fault for mismanaging your poker chips, and now you're going to be at the mercy of your opponent if they were able to kind of maybe hoard their chips till later in the turn, play a little more cautiously, a little more conservatively. They played for the second half of the turn, and now they're going to receive no opposition. They're going to have no counters to anything that they want to do, and they're going to run roughshod. And you have to hope, as the bandit player, that you don't get steamrolled too bad at the end of this turn. So you have to look at your poker chips as this is really the lifeblood of your turn. If you're very aggressive and bidding 3 chips for every activation, unless you're running a list that only has 5 or 6 guys in it, and you have a large stack of chips to play with, making these huge bids for activations on tier 3, your fodder type characters, it's probably not the best way to play it. You don't want to just throw your chips away, because like I said, once you're out of chips, you are no longer able to activate anything. And if your opponent still has chips, they're able to continue the turn until they are out of chips themselves. So like I said, it's definitely a resource management, and it's also a balancing mechanic as well. You need to look at it like that. Like I said, horde armies, they're going to have a lot of models out on the table. When they have a lot of models out on the table, that means they're not going to have, for the most part, they're not going to have a lot of extra chips to use for rerolls if they want to activate all their troops. They're not going to have a lot of extra chips to maybe get in these huge bidding wars for very specific parts of the turn where, you might be both making a mad rush for an objective. Whoever gets there first is going to score it, and then maybe you get some guys up there to support it and defend it. You might be bidding high in that situation, but if you're a horde army and it's middle to late turn, you might not have this huge stack of chips to play with because you've been using it to activate a lot of guys, do a lot of rerolls, and now things are starting to kind of dwindle down in your stack, and you're not going to have enough of chips to maybe make a play like that later in the turn, and your opponent, who's been a little more conservative, is going to have the upper hand. So, like I said, it kind of plays into managing your resources, understanding your list, and understanding the limitations that you're going to have each turn depending on what faction you have. The flip side of that also is if you run an elite list with only 5 guys, and we'll say you have a pretty decent stack to play your game, maybe 8 or 9 chips to start, and then you're rolling pretty well on your stack. You might be going into each turn with 15 to 20 chips, depending on what you're putting together. You're going to be able to throw down 3 chips anytime you can throw down 3 chips to start if you wanted to start and be like, I'm bidding on this activation, 3 chips on the table, and to a guy who only has 4 or 5 models on the table, that's not even a bat of the eye to do that, because every activation for one of those smaller units, those smaller lists, every activation is going to be extremely important when you use those characters. So, even if you use 3 chips to activate all 4 or 5 of your guys, you still might have a couple chips left over to use for rerolls, or maybe purchase an extra action if you need to do that. So there's the balancing mechanic is there to where the smaller size factions are going to be able to put themselves in a position to get those activations when they want them, where the horde size, if you go with the larger style list, you're not going to be able to really outbid as often as maybe the smaller list player, but you do have more bodies on the table to kind of work with and move around when the opportunity presents itself. So that's kind of the basic idea of how your chips work when you're using them for bidding. And also, like I said, when you're using them for bidding, you don't have to start with 1 chip. If it's a very important activation for you, you can throw out 2. You can throw out 3. Once you start going over 3, even 3 is a lot, but once you start going over 3 chips to bid for an activation right off the bat, you want to look at that as a very important activation to have in the turn for that particular character. It's got to be like a very pivotal thing for you to kind of get that bang for your buck, because you're going to be pulling a huge chunk of chips out of your stack for that turn. So let's say this turn finished, everybody went, nobody got killed, we got all the same guys here. Whatever you rolled for your D10 stack before is going to get pulled off the table. All you're going to be left with is your core stack, the stack you got from your list. You're going to roll again for the next turn. You're going to get your stack, yada yada yada. We'll go through the whole thing again. We'll say during the course of this turn, one of your guys died. Somebody got killed. Well, when a character gets killed, you have to remove a chip from your permanent stack. That's what it is. When you lose a tier 2 or tier 1 character, your main characters, not your tier 3 fodder, just tier 1 and tier 2, you take one chip from your permanent stack and you lose it for the game. Now, we'll just say, this guy only cost 1 chip, so it's a wash for you. Say, for example's sake, say it was your bandit leader who got killed, right? He generated 2 chips for your list, but he still, when he dies, you only remove 1 chip regardless. So, you know what I mean? So if you buy some of these guys in your list building and they generate more chips, even if they die, you're only losing 1 chip for every tier 1 or tier 2 character that's killed, and it's immediately pulled. So if it's in the middle of a turn and this happens, and say you have 4 chips left and this guy gets killed, well, now you're down to 3 chips. The chip is immediately pulled as soon as the character is killed. So when you're playing the game, sometimes it might be easier, you might be looking at a bunch of tier 3 characters in a certain area, and you might try to focus whittling them down early in the game. But sometimes, it might be a valid strategy to make a play for maybe some of the tier 1 and tier 2 characters, even though they might not be in the best position to maybe get hit and killed. But if you take them out early, that's going to affect your opponent's chip stack for the entire game. So that's something to think about as far as strategy goes, where if you're at a deficiency compared to your opponent with your chip stacks, it's kind of a good way to maybe even things out a little bit as the game goes on, or maybe lower that elite list's chip stack a little bit less than it normally would be, so they can't have free reign as far as winning as many activations, because they can just outbid you everywhere, or taking down their stack for taking away the amount of rerolls they might have over the course of a turn. So those are things to look at as the turns start to roll on and characters start to drop, what you're going to do as far as who you're going to shoot at and how that's going to affect the chip stack. So remember, every tier 1, tier 2 character, they get dropped, you lose a chip permanently from that stack. And then, like I said, then you still roll the D10 and add that to your stack every single turn, like a temporary stack for the D10 rolls, and then repeat the process round 4, round 5, round 6, and so on, depending on how long the scenario ends up playing out. So that's kind of how you remove the chips from your opponent's stack through killing them. Some other stuff that you can do is, like I said, we mentioned the rerolls before. if you're activating a guy and say you're shooting, or say it's a damage roll, or you're not getting the result that you want on your dice, you can burn one chip from your stack, and then you can use it to re-roll that particular die. There's no re-rolling re-rolls. You can only use one chip to re-roll one die. That's just how it goes. So if you get that re-roll and it works out for you, fantastic. If not, then you just wasted another chip on a a fruitless venture right there. The flip side of that is, if say you're getting shot at and he's getting shot at by that particular guy and he gets hit and he wants to re-roll his save and he failed his save, same thing. You can re-roll with the chip, throw it to the side, re-roll the save. If it works out, great. If it fails, well, that's on you. You just wasted a chip and you probably got a guy who just got smoked as well. So like I said, you can use the chips. Any type of dice roll. It can be shooting, saves, melee. It could be damage rolls. It could be Western tests, morale tests. Anything where there is a dice roll outside of a faction morale test, you can use a chip for the reroll unless it's stated otherwise in the rules. You can't use any chips to reroll a reroll. You can't use a card to reroll a reroll either. There's none of that in the game. You get one reroll per dice roll, and that's it. So that's one of the functions you can also use with your poker chips. A second one is that you can buy an extra action. So say you win the bidding for this character with one chip, right? So you got one chip that's been used for him. He's active. You move him. You shoot. Say you take a guy out, and you're like, man, it'd be really good if I was able to take out that other guy right in front of him. I'm going to burn another 2 chips to buy one action. So you can use another 2 chips, and you can do one more action with this guy. Say you shoot and you kill him again. Well, that's been a pretty good return for you. You're able to kill 2 characters, which would remove 2 chips from your opponent's stack permanently. And all it cost you was 1 chip for your activation, 2 chips for the extra action. And, now, you're still down to 1 chip later in the turn. We'll just say for the example's sake. But those 3 poker chips, they enabled this one character to kill 2 of your enemy's tier 2 characters, which is a pretty good deal. So you can use, like I said, 2 chips to purchase a character 1 extra action. You can only purchase 1 action per character, 1 extra action per character, and it has to be purchased when they're activated. So we'll say if he was activated earlier in the turn, later in the turn, you can't say, I want to use 2 poker chips to give this guy his 3rd action. It doesn't work like that. He has to be the active character on the table for you to purchase a 3rd action for him. If you choose to do so, it costs 2 poker chips. So this is kind of the basics of how the poker chips work. Like I said, it's an initiative-based mechanic. It also has your rerolls and the ability for you to purchase extra actions baked into the mechanics. Look at it as like resource management when you're playing the game. The reason it's there is because I wanted to give players, when they got on the table, not just an I go, you go system or anything like that, where just, even if it's just like random amounts of orders or activations that you get on the tabletop when you're pushing your models around. I wanted to have it so players were engaged every single activation of every character on the table, and there was some thought put into bidding against each other and kind of capturing that poker aspect of the Wild West when you're playing out on the tabletop, throwing chips down, trying to outbid your opponent, maybe boxing him out of a turn if he's made some mistakes and maybe he spent his stack too early. There's kind of that gambling element that goes into it as well. I just thought it's a fun way to kind of play through initiative and get the flow of the turn going. And like I said, it keeps players interacting with each other. This is the way that the game is intended to be played. But like everything that I write for whatever rule set it is, if it doesn't work for you and you want to pull the chip stacks out, or maybe you just don't want to deal with the resource management and you don't want to do that and just play it as I go, you go, you absolutely can. If you just play it as an I go, you go game, you totally can do that. You'd have to figure out how you want to do your rerolls and maybe your extra actions if you want to keep that in it and just lose the initiative part. But definitely give it a shot because, everybody's played it and through play testing and everything else. This has been like probably one of the best parts of the game has been the initiative, because there's that tension and that stress of managing your stack, outbidding your opponent, protecting your stack by not overextending your characters. There's just a lot of elements that go into it that add a lot of really good flavor to the game. So I highly recommend getting used to using it. mastering it, because it is the backbone of how the game is played. And if you get a really good handle on this, even if your dice are failing you, this is still a really good way for you to stay in the game if you're really strategic and smart with how you're using your chips. And as always, if you guys have any questions about this kind of stuff, you can go to God's Eye Games and you can send me an email. It's just joe@godseyegames.com, or you can use the contact page. And we're always active on Facebook as well. So if you guys want to go to our Facebook page for Gunslinger's Paradise, or even just hit me up on our company page for God's Eye Games on Facebook, you can hit me up there. I'll get back to you. I'll answer your questions as quick as I can. You might even be playing the game and have a question. Just feel free to fire away, and if I can get back to you, I usually try to get back to people as fast as I can. So I hope this video was good for you guys who were, needed kind of like a quick rundown of how the chips work and how to use them. I know I get a little long-winded in these sometimes, but I try to give you guys as many details as possible so you don't have to bother me. You guys can just go and play the game and not have to deal with me. So, like I said, if you guys have any questions, I gave you guys the contact info. Like I said, feel free to hit me up. If you guys have any more ideas that you want to do for the learning videos, just let me know. Thanks for stopping by, watching the video, and I'll catch you guys later.